This is the inflatable cabin I can set up solo in a steady drizzle and have a dry, livable space in under 10 minutes. That one shift, getting out of the weather fast without wrestling poles, has changed how I plan and enjoy camp days. I'd put this tent in the car camping, group camping category. It's built for families, friend groups, or anyone doing a long weekend base camp where comfort matters more than shaving ounces. If you're backpacking or moving camp every day on foot, it's not for you. If you want a spacious, weatherproof room you can heat with a small stove in winter and open up like a screened porch in summer, it hits a sweet spot. The design is a rectangular, vertical-walled cabin with inflatable beams instead of rigid poles. The height is tall enough for me to stand everywhere without hunching, which makes getting dressed, moving cots, or cooking on a small camp table much easier. The footprint uses its space well. 2 queen air mattresses fit along with a cot and a low table, and there's still a walkway. Because the walls are close to vertical, the corners are actually usable and not just dead zones for gear bags. The 2 doors sit opposite each other, which is great for a straight cross breeze, and the 6 windows have 2 layers, full mesh and a solid panel. I can run them half open to manage airflow and privacy. There's a roof vent that helps dump steam or stove heat. The floor is a heavy PVC that feels more like a raft bottom than a tent tarp. It's thick, a little cushioned, and it doesn't bunch under furniture. The fabric is a higher denier Oxford with a PU coating. I don't carry a microscope around, but I can tell you it feels substantial in the hand, and it's quieter in wind than thin, crinkly tents. The beige color keeps the inside bright during the day and doesn't bake as much in direct sun. It's a calm, neutral vibe, more portable room than emergency shelter, which I appreciate when I'm stuck inside on a rainy morning. Setup is where this thing earns its keep. I roll it out, make sure the deflation valves are closed, and hook up a pump. The included hand pump works, and I've set it up with that more than once. But for a tent this size, I prefer a battery or 12V SUP pump. With an electric pump, inflation is about 5 to 6 minutes while I stake corners or unpack sleeping pads. With the hand pump, I'm more in the 7 to 9 minute range, and I definitely feel it in my shoulders. The tent is self-supporting once inflated, but it absolutely needs stakes and guy lines, especially if there's any wind. Staking takes longer than inflation, and that's normal for big shelters. I replace the included stakes with beefier ones for rocky soil, and I run the guy lines tight. Once it's up and guyed, the structure feels drum tight. Performance in weather has been solid. In steady rain for hours, the inside stayed dry. Seams didn't weep, and the floor didn't let groundwater seep through. I still throw a small tarp or footprint down if I'm on rough ground, mostly to protect the PVC from abrasion. In wind, the air beams behave differently than poles. They flex and spring back. I've had gusts that would have made me nervous, the fiberglass poles, and here the walls bowed in and then returned without any drama. You still have to anchor it properly, but the lack of rigid poles means there's less to snap or permanently bend. One thing to be mindful of: inside temperature changes will impact pressure. On a hot afternoon, the beams feel a touch firmer. On cold mornings, a touch softer. I keep an eye on that and top up a little if needed. Using a wood stove is a major reason I wanted an inflatable cabin with a stove jack. The jack is heat resistant and positioned high enough for a safe chimney path. I always run a stove mat on the floor, keep the stove well away from the beams and the fabric, and crack opposing vents for airflow. I also bring a small carbon monoxide detector, because that's just smart in any hot tent setup. On a 25-degree Fahrenheit night, a small box stove kept the inside in the mid-60s. The tent holds heat well once warm, and the thick fabric blocks drafts. I do back the stove down before sleep and keep ventilation going. Also, I don't overinflate the beams when I know I'll be burning inside. Warm air expands, and I want a little margin. Summer comfort depends on ventilation. The PU coating on the fabric reflects a good amount of radiant heat. But if everything is closed, any tent becomes a sauna. I crack opposite windows, open both doors to mesh, and use the roof vent. On a still day, I'll prop small awnings over the doors with trekking poles to create shaded air paths. That turns the interior into a livable lounge instead of a heat trap. The mesh screens are fine enough to keep mosquitoes out, and the airflow is clean when you open things up. Condensation is a real factor with heavy waterproof fabrics. The first night I slept in it with everything shut, I woke to damp walls and thought it had leaked. It hadn't. That was just breath and body moisture hitting a cold surface. Since then, I always leave 2 windows cracked, even in winter, and I angle bedding so it doesn't touch the walls. Let me talk through a few real situations. I arrived late at a state park with a light drizzle coming down and a cross breeze over open ground. I laid the tent out, pumped it up with a 12-volt pump from the car, and had it standing before my camp neighbor had his first pole section threaded. I staked upwind first, tensioned the guy lines, and moved gear inside as the rain picked up. There's something satisfying about zipping the door and hearing rain thud on a taut fabric roof while your floor stays puddle-free. That night, the wind gusted enough to tug the guy lines, and the beams flexed without me worrying about cracks or splinters. Another trip was a shoulder season overnight with a small wood stove. I set the stove on a heat mat, aligned the chimney through the jack, and ran the pipe high enough to clear the roofline. The space warmed quickly and stayed cozy. I cracked 2 windows to cut condensation and to make sure the stove drew well. Before sleeping, I let the fire burn down and damped everything so I wasn't babysitting flames all night. Waking up to frost outside and warm, dry air inside is exactly why I like this style of tent. Space-wise, a family-use loadout looks like 2 queens, 1 kid's cot, a bin for clothes near the door, and a small table for games and a lantern. There are 2 interior pockets, which help with phones and headlamps, but I wanted more storage options. I ran a bit of paracord between loops to make a gear line for drying socks and hanging a lantern. That solved the small stuff sprawl without hacking the tent. Pack down is the one place you need a plan. If you just open the valves and start stuffing, you'll fight the bag. I open the doors halfway to let air escape, pop the deflation valves, and then roll from the far end toward the valves, pressing the beams flat like a tube of toothpaste. I walk the roll with my knees to push the last air out. When I do that, it slides back into the bag without drama. Skip that step, and it's 40 extra minutes of frustration. The bundle is heavy and bulky, so it's a 2-hand carry or a quick cart pull from car to site. If you have a small trunk, you'll need to plan space around it. There are a few quirks. The included hand pump inflates the tent, but it's a workout, and after a long drive, I'd rather save my energy for camp chores. An electric sub pump became part of my kit immediately. The included stakes and guy lines are fine for soft ground, but marginal and rocky soil or sand. Upgrading to better stakes pays off. Because the walls are taut, any zipper snags stand out. I learned to brush dirt and grit out of the zippers before closing them to keep the pull smooth. And because the fabric is waterproof, it really needs to be bone dry before storage. If I pack it damp, I set it up in the yard at home the next day and let it air out fully. A unique thing this tent gets right is how it feels once you're inside for hours. The thicker fabric knocks down noise, so wind and rain are a background hush instead of a constant rattle. The beige interior keeps it bright, even on gray days. The vertical walls make the space feel like a small room, not a sloped cave. Those are small details until you're stuck inside with kids and a deck of cards, and then they matter. Who is this for? If you're a car camper who values comfort, quick setup, and a 4-season option with a stove jack, this is a strong pick. If you often camp in open areas with wind, or you want a reliable base camp for a weekend, the Airbeam structure's ability to flex and rebound adds a layer of confidence I didn't have with fiberglass poles. If you hate wrestling poles in the rain or after dark, you'll appreciate pumping, staking, and being done. If portability and ultralight weight are your priorities, or you don't have space at home to dry a big tent after a wet trip, you'll be happier with a smaller, simpler shelter. This is the inflatable tent I keep reaching for because it trades the faff of setup for time spent actually camping. It's not perfect. Bring a better pump, better stakes, and a little patience for pack down. But once it's standing, it behaves like a weatherproof room you can tailor to winter warmth or summer airflow. That balance is what won me over. If you found this video helpful, hit subscribe and drop your questions or your own inflatable tent tips in the comments.